Hangar 13 allows us to relive the classic Illusion Softworks game with new aesthetics but keeping the same gameplay and structure. My name is Paulo, and this is our video review for Mafia Definitive Edition. Illusion Softworks has ceased to exist as such, but its imprint is still palpable. Grand Theft Auto 3 broke the mold in 2001, planting a seed for what we now know as the open world genre. The following year, months before Vice City, the Czech studio stood out for the release of Mafia, the City of Lost Heaven. As opposed to the archetypical, almost character-esque structure that Rockstar Games usually adopts for its worlds and characters, Illusion Softworks chose a more mature and realistic approach, trying to use all the technical resources available, at the time limited, of course, to depict a gangster story in 30s that could have easily come out of Martin Scorsese's head. In hindsight, Mafia did not really change the narrative of the genre as Grand Theft Auto did, but its success was such that the Czech studio was absorbed by a giant like 2K and became 2K Czech. As we all know, history repeats itself, and Mafia Definitive Edition is a tribute paid by the contemporary 2K, in collaboration with Hangar 13, to the classic game by taking the original material as a basis and adding filigrees and visual tricks from the current generation, but which is also quite restrained in pushing the limits as the original game did from a structural perspective, and that constitutes its main problem. As with the original release, Mafia Definitive Edition tells the story of Tommy Angelo, a taxi driver who, by coincidence, or not so much, ends up tangled with a bunch of Italian-American gangsters, headed by Don Salieri. The script sticks to the classics for this type of narrative, a repentant protagonist who confesses and seeks immunity for him and his family. And so, from the inside of a smoky, obscure coffee shop, Tommy tells the inspector everything he knows about the Salieri family, describing how he came to know them and gained their trust until becoming one of their main lieutenants. In this way, Mafia Definitive Edition finds a way to structure its narrative, which spans throughout 6 years, 1932 to 1938, and which will take us through different personal stages in Tommy's life and his close circle, with the same 20 missions included in the original game. Apart from the name change of one of the missions for one more suited to this day and age, there aren't many creative liberties in the horizon. In this sense, and although it is a bit too cliché, the narrative imprint of Mafia Definitive Edition will be the compass inspiring us to play it all the way to the credits. Everything is reinforced by an environment that is better achieved than ever before. The City of Lost Heaven now has a dazzling look. Alleys, industrial areas, disadvantaged neighborhoods, lavish mansions on the hillsides, financial districts filled with skyscrapers, large rural areas around it, ports, mail offices, cafeterias and theaters, hyperactive office workers, a major economic depression, and many strikes. Finally, a society in the midst of an upheaval. Although there isn't much to do in its streets, the city feels alive and like a real place, which is much more difficult to achieve than it looks. Mafia Definitive Edition may not be a game to do benchmarking on PC, not even close, but the graphic engine that was used inherited from Mafia 3 is very becoming and makes for amazing shots that often border with photorealism. However, there is also a fair amount of bugs, texture popping, and glitches depending on where we place the camera, which breaks the spell of the game's high points from a visual perspective. As we all know, we inherit the good and the bad. Mafia 3 wasn't top-notch either, mostly because of how flat the playability felt. For this reason, this remastering of the original Mafia feels anachronistic at all times, because although it looks great, it is a semi-open world game that you play just like you did other releases from previous generations. This becomes evident when we decide to face the missions, which have linear, simple objectives. The combat lacks brilliant ideas and fails to let us experiment. The coverage system is quite weak and erratic, with movements that are overly schematic in the transitions and in the animations per se. Neither Tommy nor the rest of the crooks seem to have any specific weight, which is transferred to every element of the game. Face-to-face combat, for example, is extremely harsh, and the finishers become activated without taking into account the context where they occur, which is why executions will often happen against the wall and will cause a disaster of collisions and mannequins suspended in the air. With respect to driving, it's not that much better. Mafia Definitive Edition has a generous amount of racing cars to discover, and when we're in them, it uses a camera system resembling the Grand Theft Auto 4 drunk driving, which is frankly quite odd. This becomes evident when we're on a motorcycle, where the delay between the moment we press the stick to dodge and the actual movement of our character on the screen is quite obvious. This is why Mafia Definitive Edition feels severely uneven. There is a mission in which we blow up a gas station and a high voltage cable falls and electrocutes it all. On the screen, it is seen like a festival of particles, lights, and explosions worthy of the most sophisticated action game, which goes on against a harsh monochord playability. The result, absolute dissonance. The same could be said about the structure of the game in general. Of course, one does not expect this to be an emulation of Grand Theft Auto, but it's impossible to deny that the offering feels quite meager. Mafia Definitive Edition is an extremely linear experience within the context of an open city, with much attention paid to details, but where absolutely nothing can be done. No secondary missions, no narrative bifurcations, nothing of the sort. In a way, it's even too easy to play. With a normal difficulty level, losing is rare. And the most difficult challenge when repeating a mission in the classic difficulty level is to drive the vehicles without crashing into the first light post we run into. It remains so true to the original that there is no room for surprises. We have the free ride mode, which allows you to wander about and discover a few secrets, but the incentive to do so is pretty much non-existent. This turns this Mafia remake into one of the games that really could have used a new perspective, because even if it looks good and the voice acting is very convincing, behind the set it is still the same game. With everything this involves, the original Mafia chose to tell the story in a certain way, and it had a certain structure because the genre was still in its initial stages, and there were many limiting factors. The industry and the technological progress offer a completely different context today, which is why I would have liked to see more creative courage in a script that is still as effective as it was 18 years ago. But I always say that the games have to be judged based on what they are and not on what they are not. If I stay true to this principle, I believe it is fair to say that Mafia Definitive Edition is a homage that you will greatly enjoy if you are a lover of the first game, and your main goal is to relive the adventures of Tommy Angelo and company. Although it is not the same actors, there is plenty of charisma and highly entertaining points, thanks to the great complicity among the group of cronies that carry out the mission. This is so strong that it manages to overcome the monochord tone of the missions, as well as its low resistance to our progress. This is why I especially recommend it to this target audience, which will be more willing to oversee the rough edges of the experience offered by Mafia Definitive Edition. In this case, more than just a few. Nowadays, there are many other examples of games that have found a way to present their content more organically and naturally, even more so when we see how the industry has evolved in terms of mechanic and playability. Mafia Definitive Edition looks like a brand new Ford Mustang, but with the same 4-cylinder engine as the old Ford A. This is not necessarily bad. As a matter of fact, I enjoyed the joyride that this humble yet effective engine has to offer. It simply turns out that in terms of impact and relevance, The game stays quite a few steps behind the original, and this is why it gets a score of 7.5. This has been our review for Mafia Definitive Edition. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, don't forget to follow us on social media. Check out the content at malditosnerds.com. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, or leave a comment. Also, activate the little bell to receive notifications. See you next time.